Hello everyone, this is Eflex and welcome back to another A Producer's Approach video. In this video we're going to be looking at James Egbert's song Milky Way Wars featuring Brittany Egbert. So if you haven't watched these videos in the past, I basically break down these videos into three separate sections. I have an intro backstory section, then I have a breakdown analysis section, and then lastly I have an outro section. So Milky Way Wars by James Egbert is actually the first song I heard by James Egbert. And he's a artist I've been following for quite a long time. In the very beginning, he started making this old style dubstep from this 2012 era, but this was the first kind of dubstep song where it wasn't really using the really annoying high pitched sounds. That was the more standard sound used in this time period. And this song in itself was very creative and very unique for the time period of 2012. It actually has some melodic dubstep influences in it for being a more traditional dubstep song. And James Egbert himself has made a lot of electro and complextro songs, so that's also why I've liked his music over the years. And even when he also makes house music, he has a lot of complextro vibes and different styles thrown into that. So he digs a lot into the electro style of music, which I like quite a bit. But this was one of his first releases, personally, I ever heard, and I think it might be one of the first releases that might have been promoted by him. This was on his kind of big debut album. I can't exactly remember the name of the album, but this was kind of one of the title tracks off the album, and I saw this video, if not in 2012, maybe a year later in 2013, or a little bit later from May 1st in 2012, maybe late 2012. But as the years have progressed, this song has been stuck in my head, and I always come back to this song. Even though there are a lot of really good James Egbert songs, this is just one of those ones I come back to for a nostalgia trip, and just because I remember it so much. And the unique thing about the song is that James Egbert and his sister Brittany Egbert, James produced the song, and I guess Brittany is the vocalist, kind of like how Fractal and his sister, Fractal was the producer and his sister did vocals for his songs. It's kind of like the same thing. So when you have a sibling relationship with a lot of musical talent, that's just really, really cool to see within the industry or just within music in general. So this is James Egbert's song Milky Way Wars featuring Brittany Egbert, and let's get into the song. Okay, so in the beginning you hear that chime sound playing the main melody, which is a nice sound that's being accompanied by the pads on the bottom, which are introducing the tone of this song. And then you have a clap that comes in on every, I want to say fourth, or no, actually every third beat. It sounds like third or fourth beat. You hear dun 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 dun, dun and then a clap, which is a nice percussionary sound to have to keep the tempo going and kind of to introduce the tempo and the pace in the very beginning. To be quite honest, I didn't even notice the clap until now, and I've been listening to the song for almost 10 years. So that's the first time I actually heard the clap sound. And then there's like a nice little VFX sweep into the section here. So let's keep going. Okay, so within this intro break section, what I wanted to point out was there's similar sounds to the beginning, but the other sounds that were introduced were the vocals from his sister, which is really nice. There's also an alternate melody in the background playing instead of that chime sound. It's a synth that goes. That's kind of like the alternate alternate melody playing as the main melody, which is that kind of chimey, almost like a I'm trying to think of what it is, but I can't think of that sound, so I'll just call it a chimey sound right now. But there's two alternate melodies, and then the bass line eventually comes in, and then you do hear the kick come in as well. So the bass line is pretty nice because the bass line comes in, and then the sub bass comes in along with the bass line to fill in a lot of the low end sounds, and then the kick really gives it the rhythm and fills out that low end within this section. And then the vocals on this sister's vocals are really good. And then there's a particular point within this break section where you do hear there's either a vocal chop or some reverb and delay, where you hear kind of like an echoing effect of a certain phrase or a certain word that was said in the vocals by Brittany Egbert. So really nice touch there. The tone of the song already is kind of building that kind of spacey vibe with the kind of intro melody, kind of pluckish melody sound. So anyways, let's keep going. Okay, so that was the build up into the drop. It's a very traditional build up, other than the sense that it didn't use percussion to build up within the section. So I do like that actually for a 2012 song. It's pretty unusual to hear. But basically, there's a vocal chop of a syllable. So I think it's of wars. It's like whoa whoa whoa. That is vocal chopped, and then it plays the root note of the chord progression for the bass line, and that just kind of plays in a maybe eighth note or 16th note, I think eighth note fashion, where it's da 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 da, which is a more traditional structure that a lot of artists use, where they just played the root note at this time period, and then both the vocal chop and the bass line fade out. And then you do hear like there's no sound within that section, but the vocal chop comes in where his sister's vocal says, and then these Milky Way wars, and then it drops. What's interesting about that section is because the vocals are there, it's not like Matt Duke's song Disco Dancer, where there's just like no sound for a little bit. Like it sounds a little bit thinner because the vocals are a little bit thin to fit in the song, but you could tell like there's no low end or no other sounds within that break section. But because the drop is about to hit with all the sounds, so it's just an interesting first build up, and an interesting build up within this time period for a dubstep song, where a lot of songs are doing the really big snare build ups or kick build ups or kick snare build ups or claps. So anyways, let's continue to this drop. Okay, so within this section, you do hear a lot of the unique sound design sounds from James Egbert. I can't exactly go into the sound design of the sounds themselves, but much like Complextro and dubstep, they do follow a chord progression, all those sounds, and there's a lot of a call and response between each sound, and he has a lot of different sounds kind of jam-packed in there. Within this section, the bass line is following the sub bass, is following that bass line, following a lot of those sound design sounds, just kind of all being cohesive together. But again, what I was going to say is I was focusing more on the percussion within the song, and it is a halftime rhythm, but at certain times you do hear the kick a little bit more often. So it's kind of like a mix between halftime and like double time, because you do hear the snare on the 3, so it's like 1 3, but then you do hear like a double kick, like 1 2 3, and then snare, and then like maybe a kick again, and then the next measure you'll just hear a kick and the snare, more like a halftime rhythm. So he had a lot of nice percussive variations, which again gives a nice flow and variation to this drop in terms of the percussion. And I think there was a hi-hat, but it was just more of a standard traditional, maybe just playing on each kick. So like on the 1, 2, 3, 4, from what I could tell, it wasn't like a fast fluttering kick. I mean, not kick, hi-hat from what I can tell, but the kick variation within this percussion is very nice. So that's the most and the bulk of what I could say, because I can't talk about his sound design in terms of how he actually made certain sounds other than there's a call and response. So let's continue. Okay, so that was the second part of the drop, which I noticed a few more things. So I noticed the glitching a lot in the vocal chops, which is a really nice effect to transition a lot of the certain sections where he had pauses. That's actually a really nice touch to have before going to the next section. You don't hear that too often in songs, so credit to James Egbert for that. And I like the incorporation within this section a little bit more of the melodic elements, kind of like a complexo song where you have a lot of the sound design, call and response sections in the beginning of the measure, and then towards the end you hear the chords playing like da, 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 where it kind of responds and then goes back in the next measure, starting with the sound design sound, and then having the kind of more traditional chordal notes or stabs answering and responding back. So I did like that conversation between all those sounds and the more melodic elements within this section with the chords included. The vocal kind of chopping glitching is really good, and then towards the end of this drop you hear a lot of the more melodic elements of the song, where you hear the bass line is kind of the grittier bass line, and then you hear the chord progression fading out, and then you do hear a little bit of like a minor lead or melody playing, and a little bit of the vocal chops just kind of filtering out into the second break section. So what I do want to point out is a lot of these sounds are a little bit dated for the fact that they were probably made either using Massive or Silent. I'm pretty sure a lot of these sounds were probably Massive. The synthesizer by Native Instruments called Massive. A lot of producers used that to make dubstep back in 2012 to at least 2015 before the big one used now called Serum came out. So just a little brief kind of synthesizer lesson there. But anyways, really good so far. Let's keep going. Okay, this break section is really interesting. So pretty much to start off this break section, the vocal chops fade out. Then you hear a lighter kick playing, and sometimes it plays a little more frequently than just the 1 and the 3. It goes the dum dum clap, which is pretty nice for this section, but it's a softer kick and a softer clap, so there is a change in the percussion. Then you hear the bass line playing with the chord progression, which is nice. Then you do have a melody introduced that's more of like a high-end pluck melody, but it's not really loud and in terms of volume, so it sounds like it's actually more in the background with the effects on it. And then you hear that melody play, and then eventually a piano comes into play with the chord progression. So the piano plays the chord progression while that melody is playing on the top, and it sounds like a pluck instrument of some sorts. Sounds like a kind of a spacey, kind of like a wood instrument, almost like that you'd kind of hit in terms of plucking sound. But I do like this section, brings in a lot more I guess you would say, organic sounds. It's not really a synthesized sound for both sounds. Like, it brings in a more organic sounding piano paired with a more organic sounding pluck on the top, which is really nice, paired with the percussion and the bass line, which the bass line is, pretty synthetic, made in a synthesizer there. So, and I like the movement a lot in a lot of the bass line. So anyways, it's going to transition here with a nice VFX sweep into the vocals, I believe, again, and it's going to be a similar structure to the last break section, but let's see. Okay, so that section is pretty similar to the intro break section where the vocals come in. Pretty much everything's the same. There's the two melodies that are playing at the same time. The vocals come in, the percussion is pretty much the same, the rhythms are similar or the same, the bass line is the same. What I did want to point out in this section, because I wanted to listen to a few things that were a little bit different, is that alternate melody, the synth one, not the pluck sounding sound, the synth sound goes through some like modulation or some type of effect or phasing, where it starts off sounding a little bit warmer, and then as the measure goes on and the section goes on before it outros out, it gets a lot higher pitch and the sound gets a lot thinner, which is an interesting touch within this section, because it's not really filtering that's being used. It's almost like phasing or some type of modulation for that certain sound, which I found quite interesting for that lead sound, because that's actually the lead sound I listen to a lot when I listen to this song. I listen to that alternate kind of lead within this section of the song. So overall, really great balance within this section, and we'll continue to this build up. Okay, so that was the build up, and this build up, again, like most other songs, focuses more on the build up within this section to symbolize that the drop is coming up within the next section, like the final second last drop chorus is coming up. So this build up section is longer. It's about double the length of the first build up section, which I can't complain with, because it's pretty similar in terms of structure, where he has the vocal chop and then he has the either pad or the bass line playing the root note. This time there's more emphasis on the white noise sound that's building up within the section, so that's kind of creating that tension within the section. But what I also find interesting, again, is he didn't use any percussion at all. He basically looped the vocal chopped again and then used the root note, and didn't really use any percussion at all to build up this section. Really, the VFX is the only thing that creates the tension within the section. So I find that really fascinating and really cool, actually, because again, like when I've done these videos for other songs, I thought you had to use a kick and a snare, because that's all I paid attention to before. But actually, someone in 2012 made a song where the build-ups, you didn't have to use a kick or a snare, really. It just built up the tension with the VFX, a white noise riser or something like that. So that's really cool in itself, and I have to remember that when I start producing again. And overall, it just builds up into the same section where there's the sounds kind of cut out, and then you hear the vocals, so that at least takes the space before this second drop. So anyways, let's get into the second drop and continue. Okay, so that's the first part of the second drop, and it's similar to the first part of the first drop or chorus, but the notes this time are a little more staccatoed, I almost want to say. Some of the notes I think are in like 16th notes, where like some play in like 8th notes and then 16th notes, or they're even staccatoed with some accents, because it sounded like they had some accents, which is pretty nice within this section. Gives some variation. The percussion also is a little more varied, kind of like the first part of the drop within the first chorus section. There's a little bit more variation with the percussion within this drop, but the snare always still lands on the third beat or rhythm, so it always lands on the 3, but the kicks vary in between, which is a nice thing, especially when the notes are a little bit more frequent and staccatoed. And there's a lot of nice calm response. There's some nice wubs and there's some nice synth sounds used in this section, but the staccato notes or the 16th notes incorporated within the section work really well in terms of the pacing for this section of the first part of the second drop. So anyways, this is going to be the break, and then I think it's going to go into more melodic drop, but we'll listen to the rest of the song and I'll talk more at the end of this when the song's done. So let's continue.
Milky Way war.
All right, so that is James Egbert's song Milky Way Wars featuring Brittany Egbert. We will go back to that second drop and talk about the outro. So that second part of the second drop is probably my favorite part of the song because it's the melodic drop, and I do like the melodic drop, and I like how the intro melody, that same synth or sound is used as the main melody within this section. You hear that bass line come back in playing the chord progression, and you do have different wubs at the end of the phrases or within that chord progression accenting certain notes within that chord progression. So you hear that whoop, whoop, which is really nice. I do like the complementing of that wubs with the chord progression, and I think even some of the sounds that are more the synthetic kind of sound design, unique sound design sounds of James Egbert, some of those sounds actually go along with the progression of the melody as well, which I found fascinating. And then the other sound that's really cool is that kind of almost like higher pitched siren sound that goes like like the one that kind of came in halfway through this measure to kind of emphasize like there's more high end, add more variation, which was a really nice sound. And the rhythm's really nice, and overall just a really good melodic section. And I like the change with the inclusion of the calm response, but the wub or unique sound design sounds coming in and accenting be more than being the main focus of the song. So and then the song outros with most of the sounds kind of, you know, fading out and kind of stopping after the drop, and then you hear the bass line along with that melody that you heard in the second break section. So there's it's almost like a repeat of that structure, I guess you would say, in a sense, but you do hear the hi-hat, and the hi-hat is actually not a more traditional hi-hat. It sounds a little bit like a shaker almost, like, but it's playing on every beat, and it's a really thin sound, so it's actually really hard to hear in the mix. Like it's there in the mix, but it's not something you would pick up on so much even during the drops. You would hear it more like within this outro section because there aren't many other sounds playing at this time as well. So you hear that little kind of melody play and then it outros with that. So overall, this is a really great song by James Egbert. And this was probably the first song I heard from James Egbert and became a fan ever since then, because after that I found his Complextro stuff and oh man, that stuff's really good too. So overall, if you haven't heard of James Egbert's music, highly recommend it. The album that this song is on, I highly recommend that album as well, because there's some really good Complextro songs on there and some good dubstep songs on there for this 2012 period of time. And if you want to listen to his more current stuff, his current stuff is really good too. But I will say the takeaways for this song is I really like the atmosphere. I really like the build-ups. I do like how he didn't really use percussion within the build-ups at all, really, within both build-ups. And he extended the build-up and he used no percussion. So to me, that's a little mind-blowing. But it's possible, and he pulled it off really well. And I do like how this song is a little bit more melodic than dubstep songs at this time, and this song at least doesn't use those really, really kind of annoying high-pitched sounds that a lot of songs used in this time period for dubstep. That just kind of annoys me for a lot of songs within this time period. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, definitely helps out. And there's something I need to change or I missed within this video, definitely let me know in the comments. That always helps in case I missed something. And other than that, I hope to see you guys in the next A Producer's Approach video. All right, everyone, have a good one. Peace.